Hello and welcome back to Deep Topics with Shaun. I'm your host, Shaun, and this is episode one, which, by the way, I'm filming for the second time because having done this episode already yesterday, I didn't notice that one of my mics went out halfway through the episode and only found out afterwards that the second half of my recording doesn't have any sound. So, yeah, great experience for rehearsal, I guess, because the setup is way better this time. And maybe somewhere down the line, I'll show you what episode one really did look like. It did look good, not good enough. And now that I'm seeing what I'm seeing, I'm really happy with the way that it's turned out. So, thank you for joining me. I know that, well, you may not know this, but this podcast has been a long time coming, and it did take a bit of courage and it did take a bit of growth in terms of self worth to get to a point of deciding that, yes, I do have something valuable to share, and yes, I am worthy of sharing my story. And can my story help others? Yes, it can. Because one thing that I've definitely learned from my life and from my journey up to this point is that we more often than not think that we are alone in our experiences and alone in our challenges and in our sufferings and so forth. But when we share our stories, we find that we are more alike than we are different. And we often also find that there are very much similarities and commonalities that we share as humans, and that makes it such that there are only certain types of experiences that we can experience in physical reality, and there are only so many sets of behaviors and tendencies that we can express in this lifetime. And that makes our experiences very much unique in some sense, but similar in others. And when you let go of the pride of wanting to be unique in your experience and feeling that, well, nobody can experience what I'm going through and nobody can understand what I'm going through. And once you get over that pride and you realize that many have experienced what you've experienced before you, and many will continue to experience what you experience after you, then it is kind of a very much welcoming, embracing feeling, a feeling of I'm not alone in this. And not only am I not alone in this, but thousands, maybe millions of individuals before me have done this before. And many of them have often shared their learnings and their lessons, whether we choose to listen to them on a video, whether we choose to listen to them on a podcast, or whether we choose to listen to them in other formats on TV, in books, in movies, and so forth. So, getting to this space of worthiness, of believing that I have a story to tell, of believing that my voice is worth listening to and that my journey is worth sharing, and to have the courage and the vulnerability to want to do that in the first place, I think is a huge and significant step. I'm currently recording this episode in my apartment in Cape Town, and as you can see, or maybe not, depending on which platform you're listening to, the sun is about to encroach on my territory, and we're going to see how well does this work out for lighting. And I'm going to use those learnings for the next episode, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I did mention I'm so grateful and thankful that you're here, and I hope that you like this podcast enough to want to stick around and to subscribe so that you get more updates about subsequent podcast episodes. Who am I? If you don't already know, I think I kind of may have assumed that the only people listening to this podcast are people that know me. But if you're one of those people that are new to Shaun, then let me give you a bit of a rundown on who I am. Um, my name is Shaun, and the name of this podcast is Deep Topics. And I like talking about deep topics. I find deep topics so much fulfilling, and I thrive on deep conversations. And I feel that in everyday conversations, there's not enough depth. And I also have found that whenever having a deep conversation with someone in my everyday experience, they always at the end preface, wow, that was deep, as if that is something out of place in physical existence. And personally, I find deep topics so binge worthy. I find it so enjoyable. I find it so, it makes my soul come alive that I don't think there's enough opportunity out there in the world to have deep topics. And that's why I'm hoping that this platform and this podcast creates the opportunity for me to speak more on those topics. And when, if guests do come, perhaps we will be able to share some of those topics with you. And also reflecting on my history, there have been so many conversations that I've had with individuals where at the end of that conversation, you come out with so many insights that it's often one of those things of, were we recording this? I think that so many people will find this valuable, and now they will, because there will be a platform to share those insights. There will be a platform to share those conversations. And yeah, I'm so grateful and thankful again to be in this space to be able to share this conversation with you. Um, I was talking about my background. Yeah, I am currently living in Cape Town, and I turned 30 this year. And when I turned 30 this year, I turned 30 on the 4th of May. And I really did have a lot of vision for my life and what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And I started off, I was born in 1994, which, if you're South African, you know that as the age of democracy. And I grew up in a town in KwaZulu Natal called Greytown. Greytown is 1 hour outside of Pietermaritzburg. And if you know anything about small towns, then you know that everybody is in everybody's business. And that, for me, was a huge challenge, because growing up, it was very tough to have privacy. And when you walk down the road, everybody knew who you were. They knew your name, and they knew your family history, and they also knew the types of conversations that were going on in your home. So personally, I was not that like extroverted, joyful, blissful child who's happy to celebrate their existence. I was very much emo, introverted, feeling lonely, insecure, and too much of a mental and emotional wreck to be able to appreciate the closeness of what Greytown was back then. I grew up in a family that was plagued with poverty. And the story about this is an interesting one. Um, when I was born in 1994, I was born to a single mom, and I was told the story of how my dad left my mom a couple months before my birth because he had a family that he was originally with before he moved to Greytown, and then moved back to be with them before my birth. And so the dominant narrative of my growing up was that my dad abandoned me. And I don't think that my family had the emotional insight to understand how damaging that narrative was to share with a child. And so from the get go, my experience of myself was one of rejection. How could I be worthy of love if my own parent couldn't stick around for me? And the other story that was told to me was about how when my mom gave birth, there was a woman in the hospital who wanted a child and was prepared to ask my mom to take me, because they had this idea that my family was so plagued with poverty that they wouldn't do well with the child anyways. And this woman perhaps thought that she could give a better life to me. And so there you go again, this this idea that even my mom, and I don't think it was considering, I don't think she was considering it, but this narrative of rejection just, it just kept hitting the nail on the head, a double whammy, let's call it. And so I, deep down inside, had very much low self worth and a lot of self loathing. I did not consciously know what the thoughts associated with hating oneself and loathing one's existence was. But internally, I could feel the feeling of not feeling worthy to be alive. Nobody wanted me, everybody wanted to reject me. In my family, I was seen to be the problem child. I was seen to be the worst. The worst. Living in Greytown was seen to be a shame. And amongst various other family members, there were a lot of things about me that were ridiculed, like, for instance, the texture of my hair and my body type and my skin tone. And I I was also told that I looked a lot like my dad. And I think that my dad leaving caused some type of trauma in the family, such that their dislike for him was somehow also seen with me when they looked at me, even though I was in some ways loved, and now I feel may have been in some ways always reminding them of the trauma that my dad brought to the family. So I grew up in my great grandmother's home in Greytown from 1994 all the way up until 2012, when my great grandmother passed away. And I lived there with my great grandmother, I lived there with my grandmother, and I also lived there with my mom. So as I mentioned, it was very much financially challenging time, and my mom was the only one who at the time had a full-time income. I remember that my grandmother had a freelancing income, and that um, she was selling dried fruits. And it was such an interesting situation that for a packet of 7 rand of dried fruits, that she would make 1 rand from that. Now that I think about it, it might be a relatively decent commission, but taking into account the demand for dried fruits and the challenge of doing the hard sell, that actually made it quite sad that she was only earning a rand per packet. Um, yeah, if you can see the video right now, the sun is giving me this amazing glow. Sorry, pause for a second on me living in my great grandmother's home, and let's appreciate for a second whether this sunlight is doing it for the lighting. I think I'm gonna let it stay. Let it stay for now. Okay, getting back to my great grandmother's home. I lived there with my mom, my great grandmother, and my grandmother. And it was very much a chaotic and volatile experience because in my family, poverty stressed out everyone. Not having resources stressed out everyone. And that stress was manifesting as anger and hatred. There was no respect amongst the family members. There was fighting, there was swearing. And I was also beaten as a child, and that was seen as normal. It was so traumatic, honestly. Um I don't think I will ever in this lifetime recover for how traumatic it was growing up as a child in that family. There's not enough therapy that will ever revitalize me and rejuvenate me back to health, but I'll continue day by day to do the best that I can to regain a sense of normality and optimal functioning. It has been so challenging that when when some people talk about their childhood experiences, and they talk about their childhood experiences in a way that they reflect on what a joyous and playful and blissful and wonderful time it was. I reflect on my childhood experiences, and I have maybe three or five memories of something good that happened, and then I have 50,000 memories of all the traumatic and fucked up things that I went through. So, oh, and amongst that, I don't remember 90% of what happened. So from the 10%, 80% of the 10% was weird and fucked up. And 20% of the 10% was, I would say, normal and enjoyable. So yeah, life definitely wasn't easy. And I remember crying a lot. And not the not the type of crying of like I'm not getting what I want, the type of crying like I want to die right now. And there you go. Just a few minutes ago, I told you about the narrative of rejection, intense self-loathing, and not feeling worthy of existence, not feeling worthy of love. Um, Growing up in a chaotic and volatile environment, being framed as the problem of the family, being hated by certain family members, being looked down at by other family members looking at my physical characteristics and saying, "We don't like that. That's not what we're like. We don't have that. Why are you like that?" Being looked at by family members and seeing a reflection of my dad, who they hated, maybe for some reasonable reasons. And it was just very dark and heavy. It was so dark and heavy. Was that hell? I think that was hell. I think that was hell that I grew up there. I don't want to take away from that people did their best, because sometimes when you talk about the weird and fucked up things that you went through in your childhood, they often try to frame the situation and, oh, you know that they were facing their challenges and they were going through things, and they did their best. And in some ways I can see that they did what they thought was right. In other ways I see that what they thought was right was so fucked up, and I'm also so sorry that they went through that themselves to learn those types of behaviors that they would then perpetuate on their offspring. And if anyone that I know is listening to this and is feeling challenged to hear the story, well, I've never told it like this before. So if you're feeling intense emotions, then feel them and let me speak my truth. Yeah, When I was in grade one, and I was 6 years old, my grandmother moved out because she got into an argument with her mom, my great grandmother at the time. And she went to live with my aunt, or who was also a daughter, and she went to live in Petermaritzburg. So at that point, it was me, and it was my great grandmother, and it was my mom living in that home. You still see me? Yes. So I think that that made it even more challenging because there was even more limited financial resources and even more pressure on my mom. Because from some stories that I've heard, um, my mom was buying food, but also was feeling pressure to contribute to utilities and rent. I may or may not be wrong with that one. So yeah, it was just a very much stressful situation for everyone. And in my mind, when I reflect on 6 years, 7 years old, 8, 9, 10, and 11, I I struggle to have memories of my personal life, and most of my memories are of my school experience. And in my school experience, there are some pleasant things that I can reflect on. There are also some unpleasant things, but the unpleasant things in my school experience, in primary school particularly, were not as striking as some of the unpleasant things that I will remember about my personal experience. When I was 11 years old, um, it was like May of 2005, sorry, December of 2005, and it was what we call school holidays. So school had closed, and I may or may not have been waiting for the transport to take me to Petermaritzburg to go to my aunt's place where my cousins lived. I remember sitting with my great grandmother, and she she wanted to have a conversation with me, and she wanted to tell me something. She ended up showing me something. She ended up showing me a huge lump the size of a grapefruit under her left armpit, and she asked me if that was like a boil. To some who are not aware, a boil is often referred to. It's like a pocket of pus, white blood cells, other fluids, and so forth in one's body. It didn't look like that. It was too big to be that, and evidently it was cancer. It was a tumor. That was May 2011. By April, her state had so severely deteriorated that she could not get out of bed and was being fed cereal and tea by my mom and could not stomach solid foods. By May, she had passed away. By November, her son, or my grandfather at the time, was selling the home that we lived in, even though we lived in it and could not afford to purchase it. Fucked up thing number 217. So, out of maybe opportunity and some pity, my mom's brother purchased that home and built a outhouse or granny flat in the backyard. I remember moving into that outhouse at the end of 2006, and I was 12 at the time. Little did I know the challenges were going to exponentially increase because all throughout, at the end of 2006 and going into 2007, I learned that my mom had a lot of credit card debt. And due to the excessive amount of credit card debt, her monthly payments were very much excessive as well, and therefore we struggled with food at times. Fortunately, and yeah, very much fortunately, I'm so grateful that my aunt at the time, or my mom's brother's wife, often shared her leftovers with us regularly. And it was very much a saving grace because I also have memories of like knocking on a neighbor's door and asking if they have any food for us. And I was 12 at the time. And one of the neighbors was an old lady, and she gave me a chicken and mushroom pie, which I then went home and ate. Oh, it was so sad. I'm so sorry, Sean, that you went through that. And when I do cry at an opportunistic moment, I'll make sure to also mourn some of the tragedies that you experienced as I bring them up and remember them in this format. So in 2007, I was living in the outbuilding and with my mom, and in the front house was my mom's brother, his wife, and their son. And I remember that they hated me way too much to hate a family member. Um, I was an angry child. I was entering puberty, and I was very much angry also at my mom because she was emotionally unavailable and not at all able to handle any type of description of my personal or inner experience. And everything that I felt that it should be kept to me, and that not only can she not hear it, but she cannot know what to do with it, and she will not do anything with it. And I'll get a response of okay, or a fixing response of sharing, advice on how to resolve it. At the time, I really just wanted somebody to listen to what I was going through. And I don't think that either of us knew what that even looked like in the first place. Because I was an angry and volatile child, I used to swear at my mom a lot and say mean and nasty things. And I was furious. I was furious internally. I was burning internally with anger at what? When I'm able to pinpoint what exactly I was angry about at 12 and 13 years old, I will tell you. But from from 13 years old, being in grade 7, which was the first year into moving into that house, to 14 years old, being in grade 8, going to high school, little did I know that the challenges were going to increase exponentially again. How? I'm going to tell you. When I. Oh, it's the ring. Okay, I've been wondering, sorry, viewers that are watching me, wondering what's the shadow. The ring light is casting a shadow. Um, when I went into high school with a lot of optimism and a lot of enthusiasm, but I was not hearing too many good things about that school. In fact, I was hearing very much bad things about that school, and I was also told that the quality of education had decreased significantly, and I was told that the best teachers had left, and I was told that the student population was deteriorating in potential. And so it wasn't really set up well for me going into grade 8 into that high school. In addition to that, puberty was starting to set in and my body was changing, but also my attraction was developing for a certain type of gender. Newsflash, it's not female. And I did not even know that at the time. Like when puberty is happening to you, when puberty was happening to me, actually, I was not really knowing what is this sexuality thing, what is this attraction thing. All I could experience was being ridiculed by Indian boys that looked like me for the way that I walked and for the pitch of my voice. And also because they were deeply insecure about themselves and they were being dominated and controlled by their family members, and they sought to apply a similar domination and control to me in the high school experience, where I was sad, weak, and pathetic. And I know I did the best that I could, because taking on the nature of pathetic kind of did keep me safe to some extent, safe from violence, but not too safe, because one of my friends at the time was, I think, also very much angry. A friend that one of my closest friends at the time, who was also my next door neighbor, when I was in grade 8 and we both went to high school together, noting that we both were changing, growing, and evolving into our adult selves, there was a distinction starting to form. And this distinction was mostly about um, likes, dislikes, peculiarities, tendencies, ways of expression. So, what I can tell you is that from what I saw, I was more so resonating with doing well with my academic environment. The school performance really did matter to me because, being in that family that I grew up in, there was a lot of pressure from the community to excel academically, and then to uh, make something out of yourself, and to save your mom from poverty, or to take her out of that environment. So there was a lot of pressure on me to be an academic performer. And plot twist, I was performing immensely superbly year after year, from grade 1 all the way up to grade 12, but the awards only started coming at grade 4. And so I had this reputation in the town for being extremely smart. And I loved it because, from what I've just shared with you, at home I felt like a worthless piece of shit. But when I walked into the town, I was celebrated and people loved me and they embraced me, and it it fed my soul when all I wanted to do was cease to exist. It fed my soul with that people see you, and they don't just see you, but they love what you're doing. They don't love who you are, they love what you're doing. So going into grade 8 into a new school, which was high school at the time, I was very much prideful about believing that my academic performance was a result of my personal internal characteristics. And in some ways, I think that that translated to a feeling or sense of superiority over others. So a bunch of factors were starting to combine in that grade 8 experience when I turned 13 and 14. I turned 14 when I was in grade 8. A bunch of unwholesome factors were starting to combine during that time. So my best friend was, so the friend group was starting to like drift apart, and I was here making friends with the girls, and my neighbor at the time was making friends with the guys, and the guys did not like anything about me because of because of my authentic expression at the time. It was not looking too good to them. And you also know that I was being like heavily ridiculed and bullied, probably for like 5 years. Probably my whole high school experience I was bullied. um yeah, by Indian boys that looked like me, that were being dominated and controlled in their families, and sought to then dominate and control someone who appeared as a victim in the high school, which I was that person. And then to, the light, it has, sorry, if you're listening on audio, the light has just um, balanced out, and I'm no longer glistening to the gods, but it is a great setup. So thank you. Thanks for that intermittent pause. Anyways, yeah, my one of my closest friends at the time was starting to become antagonistic towards me, and remember that I was being very much prideful about my sense of self. It's kind of a weird balance, internally feeling like nothing and externally feeling like everything. Taking a breath to let that sink in. So, yeah, in grade 8, there was this leadership role called Representative Council of Learners, and I know that I was like looked at as someone who would be worthy and interesting to take on something like that and to represent the student body. But I had this like attitude about me of too much excessive purity, in that as the drift was happening, the boys were leaning towards drugs, alcohol, girlfriends, and they were like mentally checked out of academic performance. I did not have the opportunity to mentally check out of academic performance because the stakes were too high for me. I was going to die in poverty if I did not exceed academically and then use those stepping stones to create further steps and paths elsewhere. So, in just random conversations with people about that leadership role in grade 8, I mentioned that, when I was, if I were to be elected, I would be uncovering who, like, who the smokers are and those types of things. My One of my close friends at the time was starting to not be a close friend, but who was also my next door neighbor, heard that and took that in such an antagonistic way that he wanted to become violent with me. And it never really got to the point where I was physically assaulted, but I know that there were two opportunities in which he did try. And so, even going to high school was a very fearful experience for me because, as you know, I was very much angry at home. I was stressed out and a nervous wreck. I was experiencing excessively high standards. My body was changing and I was developing acne. So I was very much deeply insecure about my authentic expression, in addition to how my voice was changing, in addition to the way I walked. And here I was experiencing threats of violence and intimidation. And so I was very much also fearful to go to school. I experienced that fear for a year and a half. Nobody should experience something like that. I'm so glad I didn't kill myself. I don't even think I knew about what suicide was back then. And it would not even have helped anything to even take that action, because if your mind is suggesting to you that the way to survive is through death, that is such a fucked up thing that it is some ways nonsensical and illogical, and not at all helpful. So persevered throughout that because I had a higher purpose, and I know that from what you've heard about right now, that higher purpose was about getting me getting myself out of that environment, and doing that through academic performance. So something interesting happened in grade 9, which was a year and a half after this event. Um, I was asked by the same friend who was becoming violent with me. It's been a year and a half. I was asked by his mom to help tutor him in the school subjects, which I did. I did do that, and I practiced great and wonderful forgiveness. So amazing that your perpetrator can be forgiven to such an extent that you're now supporting their growth. Kudos to you, Sean. Kudos to you in the past for meeting the moment with such courage and compassion. Because, yeah, give life more of that. Um, Interestingly enough, from grade 9, which was like from grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, I was not experiencing any physical threats because that had resolved itself with that one individual. But I was still experiencing bullying and ridicule by the insecure Indian boys that were being dominated and controlled by their families and sought to do the domination and control outside of the house with someone that presented as a victim, and I appeared to be that for them. So I experienced that, and it definitely was challenging, but in some ways, I met the moment with embracing what my body was doing and what my authentic expression was telling me. So, in some ways, I fought back with being more of who I was becoming. So, that took me to 2012 when I was in grade 12. And in grade 12, I remember doing so well academically that I was invited to the Durban International Convention Center to a government awards ceremony where I received results in my final matric exams that were in the top 5 in the district. And that was the first time that I got such national recognition, but also received my first laptop, and that was a game changer. The first laptop was a game changer. Shout out to you, Mr. Mudley, who gave me a desktop computer in when I was in grade 10. Shout out to you. I remember, yeah, in another episode, I'm going to tell you as I continue to dig up these memories of various people who played such pivotal and significant moments in my life. Mr. Mudley was one of those people who he was a teacher but also like a friend who deeply encouraged me regardless of what I was going through. And oh, I value that so much. Thank you so much for that. um Anyways, yeah, getting those awards and being invited to that ceremony was very much pivotal for my journey because those results also helped me get into UCT, the University of Cape Town. And I I moved to Cape Town in 2013 to study my first undergrad degree, and I'm still here. I'm still here. It's been 9 years. I'm still here. I'm sitting on this couch now. I'm sitting in a suburb that when I came to UCT, this suburb was only for the wealthy. You don't hear about you hear about wealthy students living here because their parents are paying the rent. I'm living here now. I don't know what it says about my socioeconomic circumstance. But I don't care because this is my dream apartment and this is my dream suburb and I'm living my dream. So, if we did start off this episode with how did I get here, then we have a quick summary of how I got here. And how I got here was through pain, suffering, hardship, ridicule, trauma, threats of violence, threats of intimidation, more pain, financial challenges, suffering, fury, anger, being hated, self loathing, being seen as less than, being seen as unworthy, being rejected. I got here by walking on shards of glass. Not only was I walking on shards of glass, I was walking in a rain of hellfire, and still I still I got here. To the forces that supported my existence throughout this great and challenging time, I express my heartfelt and deepest thanks with such sincerity that there appears to be guidance and support in ways that I cannot physically perceive. And when I do reflect throughout that time, one thing to definitely reflect on is how throughout the challenges, and there were so many challenges, there was so much suffering, there were so many trials. Throughout every challenge, there was always a purpose. There was always something that I was striving for. Interestingly enough, when I was in high school and all the way up until 2020, the purpose was the one that was fed to me by the family and the community, which was excel academically, make something of yourself as if I'm not something already, and take your mom from here, which is like code for pull out of poverty. That was the purpose. My purpose was directly tied to someone else's existence. Now I know that that is not at all healthy or sustainable. It was not at all healthy or sustainable. You know, coupled with all those weird factors that I was dealing with, the the suicide inclination started definitely coming up more heavily when I went to university. From age 18 up until age, what can I say, 2020, from, yeah, anyways, from that entire university experience, the suicidal inclination was very much heavy because my purpose was not at all linked to my own existence. It was more so linked to outcomes in someone else's life. So, so the suicide was showing up often because the progress was not seen as strongly as what the world and society promised the pace would be. I'm so glad that I snapped out of it. It's not that I'm not supporting my mom with her financial situation in a way that I can. And I can be honest and say I cannot do it with financial contribution anymore. But I do think that we've got to a space where we see that my purpose in physical reality is not to save somebody. I have goals and I have dreams, and there are things that I want for my life, and I will always go back and share memorable moments with the woman that birthed me. But this life is not set up for me to be the son that stayed at home. And this life is not set up for me to be the savior of the family. And this life is also not set up for me to be worthless and insignificant. I've seen that internally, having felt those feelings about myself, external reality never agreed that that was the case for me. There was always a deep sense there of knowing it wasn't right to feel that way, and knowing that I am worthy and deserving of feeling whole and significant and worthy of existence, and that I continue to strive until I found that. So finding that higher purpose, reflecting previously, it was attached to the outcomes in someone else's life, and then flash forward presently, it's now attached to my existence and expression as a divine entity in physical reality. That, I believe, is a more sustainable purpose. When your purpose is intrinsically tied to your existence and your expression and what you can contribute in the world, that I think is a great and wonderful and special thing. And I'm so glad to have reached this point. Sorry, I just heard a sound there. Um, you know that throughout this time I found clarity, and I found clarity not instantaneously at all. I found clarity because I searched for it incrementally and successively, and I went through the trials and I did the trial and error. And each time I learned something from the challenge or the problem, I made sure to take a step in the right direction going forward. If I did take a step and then take the same step again, it would often be incrementally changing that to incorporate the learning. So, to an external observer, they might see me taking a step that I've taken before, but internally I know that there's something here that's different. I just want to try this thing out and see if it works. If it didn't work, I must take the learnings and I must move on. But having the higher purpose is very much valuable because as humans, we seek things like purpose, meaning, and fulfillment in our lives. And we can impulsively believe that that is something that just dawns on a person. From what I've experienced in my life, I can tell you that getting to what will fulfill you and getting to what you will find purposeful and getting to your meaning, it's only going to come from searching for it. There's famous quotes about this. The most famous one, seek and ye shall find. I think seek and ye shall find is more so directly related to the infinite consciousness or God. But seek and ye shall find can be very much easily applied to purpose, meaning, and fulfillment. Do not expect to just know it. Do not expect to just have it. Do not look at others and think it came easy to them. No, they also underwent the the path of searching, and they have come to a point where they have determined that what they have found is right for them, and they are satisfied. You cannot search indefinitely for something when you have already found something. So when you find your purpose and you believe that it's the right purpose for you, like I did when I found what my purpose is, when I believe that it's the right purpose for me, I'm not going to continue to search. I might refine it, but there's no need to abandon it, and believe that it's not for me when I've already determined that it is. So having that purpose and throughout all those challenges, continuing to move forward, I think the drive and the energy, the optimism all came from having the grand vision of what is this all leading towards. And as I sit here now, the idea of having the grand vision with conviction is not so much appealing anymore, because having conviction about a vision, I've seen, cannot be um, so reliable, because often the vision might appear in a way that feels what it would feel like but might look different to what you expected. So I now have more flexibility with the vision, and I more so seek to have goals, Yes, but also intentions. I think intentions are very important. Um, and the purpose must be there. It must be there throughout time, because there will be challenges that are great. There will be trials that are so significant, but the will to overcome those trials, the call to something will be stronger when the purpose is there. So when you have purpose, you definitely start to see your obstacles differently. And instead of being something that gets you down or something that you stumble upon, you start to see the obstacles as the path to success. You start to see it as a way to learn, as a way to incrementally take a step forward. Each obstacle that I experienced caused, of course, it caused suffering, distress, pain in the moment. But as I continue to go on this journey, I start to see that at some point you've experienced so many obstacles that you cannot reliably expect an obstacle to be pleasant, because then it would not be an obstacle. Instead, you must have an attitude of courage to want to overcome that obstacle, and knowing that sometimes obstacles appear to have a level of difficulty. I think that that level of difficulty is directly related to a bunch of things that we can factor, like courage. If your courage is low, then the level of difficulty of the obstacle might appear to be high. If the courage is high, the level of difficulty of the obstacle might appear to be average. So, that type of attitude towards obstacles, I think, has been very much impactful for me, and it's something that I would recommend. The other thing which I didn't cover yet, and I'm definitely going to talk more about this going forward, but the purpose of this episode was kind of to share a bit more about myself and how I got here. But one great and wonderful thing that I stumbled upon is meditation. And meditation, not at all esoteric, but meditation in the pure observation of the mind, the sitting still with eyes closed, has been so impactful for my growth, my development, helping me through some of the greatest challenges that I ever experienced. To just sit still and observe the mind, it's like a breath of fresh air, is how I can describe that. A breath of fresh air. I'm going to touch more about meditation and my journey with meditation in a subsequent episode, but I hope that you found this episode helpful, because stumbling through my memories and stumbling through the path on how I got here, I really do reflect on how it has been like so chaotic, tumultuous, and volatile, but with a higher purpose in mind. Those challenges appeared to be traversable, and the will to progress was always there, and to see some type of difference, it really did make a difference. So I'm going to share a lesson which is on my laptop right now, so don't mind that. But finding and embracing a higher purpose can be transformative. It gives you strength during tough times and clarity when things seem chaotic. And that's such a beautiful ending to this episode, an episode that started off talking about some very deep and heavy things, and it's like blossomed into this beautiful flower of purpose and fulfillment and meaning. And yeah, I'm so grateful and glad that you've joined me. And it turned out well. The lighting looked great at the end of this episode, and I'm very much happy with the frame, and I'm happy with the composition. And say hi to Bruce over here. Bruce is my ginseng plant um, that is thriving and flourishing in my presence. So I'm glad you're enjoying your stay, Bruce. Um, and if you're watching the YouTube video, you see my artwork over here reflected in the mirror. which is actually a drawing of the view that I'm looking at out through the window right now. I might share more of that with you in another episode. We're reaching the 1 hour mark, and that was my goal for episode one. And the mic is still on. I've kept it in my hand so that I can always see whether the light is green, just to avoid getting into that situation that I experienced yesterday. Um, yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to see more of Deep Topics with Shaun, then make sure to subscribe on the platform that you're listening to this audio on, whether that's Spotify. If you're watching this on YouTube, then please subscribe to the channel. And if you're on Spotify, leave me a review. It's going to be so much helpful to help others to see whether Deep Topics with Sean is a podcast that could be helpful and insightful for them. And if you're on YouTube, then please do take the time to leave a comment down below. If there was anything in this episode that you resonated with personally, if there's anything that I shared that made you think about something you experienced that's similar, or if you have an experience that you also want to share, then that can create a thread for us to connect with each other in the comments down below, and also to find out that we are more alike than we are different. So that's it for this week's episode. And leave a like on this video if you're watching the video. Leave a thumbs up on Spotify if you're on Spotify. Subscribe for more. And I want to thank you for joining again. And until next time, take care. This is Sean. Bye, everyone.